Welcome back to another edition of the WSAV Daily Huddle, a daily sports show meant to keep you informed of what has been and what will be from the Coastal Empire and Low Country all the way to the biggest news and notes on the national sports scene. Today is another packed show for you. We're going to talk high school boys quarterfinal action in the state tournament for basketball. We are going to have a special guest on the show to talk about Georgia athletics from basketball to baseball and looking ahead at spring football. And then we are going to talk University of Georgia, South Carolina, beyond the state lines a little bit to see what's going on in the region. And we will finish with some talk about the NBA and the Atlanta Hawks, as well as what's wrong with the NBA right now. My name is Hank Tatum. Today is Thursday, March 5th. And without any further ado, let's go ahead and get to today's first quarter. We're talking high school basketball. Yesterday, we talked about the girls' quarterfinals as a few teams from the area got to the semifinals. And yesterday was also the boys' quarterfinal matchups. So now we have our semifinals set in both boys and girls brackets in the GHSA state tournaments. Here's a little bit of what happened from teams in our region competing to make it and keep their seasons alive. We'll start in the private division as Calvary Day's season comes to an end. The Cavaliers fell 66-63 to the number one seeded Darlington Tigers. They lose that game 66-63. Again, it ends a pretty impressive season from Calvary Day. Ultimately, just not enough to go on the road to Rome, Georgia, and beat Darlington to keep their season alive. So their 2026 campaign ends, but a valiant effort in the quarterfinals. In Single A Division II, Portal moves on to the semifinals, defeating Mitchell County 68-62. Now they will play Washington-Wilkes County at 7 p.m. on Friday at Fort Valley State University. So big for Portal to get to these semifinals. Of course, they've got to go through Washington-Wilkes if they want to make the state finals, but they are in the Final Four, a massive accomplishment for Portal in this 2025-2026 season. We move now to Single A Division I, where we've got the number one seed in the entire bracket here in our market, and that's Vidalia, who keeps their season alive. They defeat Commerce by 10, and they move on now to the semifinals, which will also be at Fort Valley State University. Vidalia will take on Southwest on Saturday, so a big game for them upcoming. Again, they are the number one seed in this bracket, and they are 2 games away from bringing a state championship back to Vidalia. It would be really cool to see them get this done. And again, 2 games left to go against Southwest, and then they would get to the state championship game. In 4A now, the last of our remaining teams was Ware County, who loses to Jonesboro 62-31, ending their season. So who's left now that we're in the semifinals in both the boys and girls tournaments? Well, we've got 3 teams from the Coastal Empire that will be making appearance in the Final Four, all 3 of them trying to bring back a state championship to the Coastal Empire. And those teams, of course, are Portal and Vidalia for the boys' side, and Metter Girls remain as the lone team from the market on the girls' side. We, of course, will keep you updated on Monday with how those teams do and how they fare moving into the state championships. I believe by Monday we will have our state champions in both boys and girls, so hopefully we'll have a few state champions to talk about next week. All right, moving on to Statesboro to talk about what's happening right now with Georgia Southern across multiple different sports here. We will start with men's basketball. 1 down, 5 to go. The Eagles beat Old Dominion 88-84 on Wednesday in the Sun Belt Conference Tournament. That was the second round after Georgia Southern earned the first round bye as the 10 seed, and they will now move on. So they keep their season alive, at least for another day. Spud Webb and Alden Applewhite combined to score 56 of Georgia Southern's 88 points in this game. 2 great performances from them. I believe a season high for Applewhite in points scored. And I thought the most impressive thing from this game is that Georgia Southern was able to fend off a 45-point performance from Old Dominion's Jordan Battle. That is extremely impressive to somehow win that game despite giving up that kind of performance. Big news for Georgia Southern men. Again, they are now moving on to the next round of the tournament, and they've got to win now 5 games in the next 5 days to be crowned Sun Belt Tournament champions and ultimately get to the NCAA tournament. Their next opponent will be Arkansas State, which will be tonight on this Thursday evening in the next round of this tournament. The winner of that game will go on to face South Alabama. Now, these 2 teams, Georgia Southern and Arkansas State, have met once before this season, and Arkansas State got the better of the Eagles. They beat them by 17 points in Statesboro back in January. So Georgia Southern's going to have to flip the tides here and pull off the upset win over Arkansas State if they want to stay alive. Otherwise, their season could very well come to an end tonight. Something to keep an eye out for. I believe that game is at 7:30 on this Thursday evening. Now we move to the Diamond, where baseball fell on Wednesday in Charleston, South Carolina, to the Citadel. They lose that game 1-7, and now are 2-10 on the season. This is no victory lap by any means, but did I kind of call this game yesterday? Yeah, I did. Unfortunately, the writing was on the wall. We've seen how Georgia Southern has performed this season. 289th out of 300 in team ERA for the pitching staff, and I just had a feeling that the Citadel team was better than the record may have suggested, and thought they might get the better of Georgia Southern, and that they did. Georgia Southern actually out-hit the Citadel in this game, I believe 9-8, but the Citadel was able to put up a 4-run second inning that helped them to victory. So now Georgia Southern 2-10, plenty of newcomers this season, so still plenty of time to turn it around, as really all that's going to matter is Sun Belt play. But they're going to try and get right this weekend in a series in Statesboro against Tennessee Tech. Now, women's basketball for Georgia Southern is one to watch, as they are the number 1 seed headed into the Sun Belt Conference Tournament, which is now a few rounds in the books as well. But the Eagles will get to wait until Sunday before playing, as they have a bye all the way to the semifinals. So they will have to win on Sunday and Monday, and that's it, to win the Sun Belt Conference Tournament Championship. And if they do that, they will break a 32-year-long drought to get back to the NCAA Women's Tournament. Of course, we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll have plenty for you on Georgia Southern. Maybe they're in the championship the next time we see you on Monday. And with that, that's going to wrap up today's first quarter here on the WSAV Daily Huddle. But a big second quarter coming, as we will talk with our featured guest of the afternoon. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back here on the WSAV Daily Huddle. All right, welcome back. It's time to talk about Georgia Athletics, and there's nobody better to do that with than with Graham Coffey, who will be joining the Daily Huddle for the very first time today, so super excited about that. Graham Coffey is the publisher and founder of Dawgs Central. He will give you more information about what that is if you're unfamiliar here in just a second, but extremely excited for this. Graham is going to be a weekly guest appearing on the show, so can't wait to have him. And without any further ado, let's introduce Graham Coffey. All right, welcome back. Now we welcome on our new guest, Graham Coffey, on the show, the publisher and founder of Dawgs Central. Graham, I know the answer to this. First off, thanks for being here, but I'd love for you to tell people that might not know what Dawgs Central is a little bit about the platform and where they can find you.
Well, yeah, you do know the answer to that well, because you were with us last year for the football and basketball season, and we loved having you. But Dawgs Central is really, I like to think, a fairly comprehensive way to get coverage of the Georgia Bulldogs. We cover basketball, football, some baseball in person. We are a subscriber community with a forum community, but we also have plenty of free content that you can get your news from. And I like to think we've kind of become the home for deep dive analysis and certain types of analysis of UGA athletics.
Yeah, that's what I love following, especially from you, is the 12 takeaways and kind of going beyond the box scores a little bit and diving into some of the stories and stuff like that. So really appreciate you being here. Excited to talk about Georgia athletics. And Graham, I know you were in the building on Tuesday night, but Georgia basketball, we talked about it yesterday, got a huge win over Alabama. And for an outsider like myself, it kind of felt like the vibe of the program and specifically the energy inside Stegman Coliseum on Tuesday night was a little bit different for what we're accustomed to for Georgia basketball. Do you have that same feeling?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, it was unhinged in a way where, the crowd kind of felt similar to football stadium crowds that you get used to seeing in Sanford Stadium, where that the crowd was very much into it. They were affecting the game. The place was at capacity. There was not, I've been in a lot of games in Stegman Coliseum where you hear a section or two of visiting fans kind of start to take over the arena or take over, 25% of the crowd. None of those things happened on Tuesday night. Georgia's student section was full. The rest of Stegman Coliseum was full, and they were just very involved in the game in a way. I was at some games earlier this year where Georgia won, but the place kind of emptied out in the second half, as Georgia was doing well, and that did not happen in this game. The clock situation that happened in this game where they were delayed for 20 minutes due to a shot clock error
Yeah.
actually kind of increased the crowd engagement down the stretch, and folks were chanting out the shot clock, and it created a really fun environment. I think it was probably the best basketball environment that at least I've been a part of in Athens since maybe the Jim Herrick days, honestly, man,
Wow.
like way back 25 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of made me remember the Florida win last year, but I felt like that's a little bit different because it was the number 3 team in the country, and even then, there were still those Florida people there. But that's interesting perspective, having been in the building for yourself, and it kind of clinches, barring disaster, the second straight NCAA tournament berth for Mike White and Georgia, and it feels like every season there's a lot of back and forth on Mike White throughout the year. Obviously, Georgia hot start this year, big slump in the middle, and now they've rebounded. I'm curious if you feel the same way here, but when you just look at this season from an outside, like if you zoom out, after losing Asa Newell and Silas Demery Jr. as well, who transferred to UConn, it feels like this is impressive for him to get to 20 wins again and back to the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think, you look at what he took over. Georgia in Tom Crean's final year was 6-26. They set an SEC record for most losses in a season, and I mean, like, that is bottoming out in a very extreme way. And Mike White kind of steadily has built that roster, and he goes to the NIT semifinals in his second year very unexpectedly. They got a berth because I think Ole Miss decided not to accept an NIT berth, and they were next in the SEC standings. But it created some momentum for them at the time, and they had Blue Kane as a freshman and Dylan James as freshmen who started down the stretch of that season. And those guys came back last year. They made the NCAA tournament, but it was Demery and Newell that got a lot of the credit. And I really credit Blue Kane and Dylan James because this is their third year in the same place. There's only 22 seniors in college basketball right now that are at the same place they started. So if these guys stay one more year in Athens, they'll be in pretty rare company. Excuse me. I think for both James and Kane, there's a rotation that happens where 7 of the 11 new faces that Georgia's played this year were, coming in either out of the portal or out of high school. And it creates a world where you got to figure out how to play with these guys. And they've done a really good job. Mike White has done a really good job of kind of figuring out how to use these pieces and also getting a rotation of 11 playable guys in college basketball is really unique, very, very rare. But like doing that at a place like Georgia where you don't have a crazy NIL budget to go and buy basketball players with like a Kentucky or somebody does, I think it really speaks to Mike White's just evaluation skills, his wisdom on how to recognize what traits are going to translate from mid-major and high school levels of basketball to college. He's done a really good job, like finding pieces like Smurf Millender, who was a 5'10" guard from UTSA. And I would argue there's been some games he's been Georgia's most important player. He's hit some buzzer beaters for him this year. So they've done a really good job of kind of gelling into a team. And there was a time where it seemed like they could kind of go one way or the other, and they've taken off here lately.
Yeah, and so now looking ahead here, likely in the field of 68 when we get to Selection Sunday, just 2 weeks away now, is there more pressure for Mike White and this program to actually win a game this time after ending that drought last year and getting there, but then getting blown out in round 1 to Gonzaga? Is there maybe another step for them that they kind of have to hit for it to feel successful?
I think this season is a success no matter what, just because, this is going to be only, I think this will be the first time Georgia's made back-to-back NCAA tournaments since I think since 2001, 2002.
And I think that one even got vacated, right? Like after the fact?
Yeah, after the fact. But I mean, they played in the tournament.
Right.
Now that we're in the NIL era, it's hard to really think about some of those things the same. But I think point being, this is a 20-win regular season for just the 6th time in UGA basketball history. This is 3 straight 21 seasons, I think, for only the third time ever in UGA basketball history. So you're hitting some rather historic benchmarks already. I do think for sure, like winning a game would help them from fan engagement standpoint, from kind of bringing some of the more casual, maybe Georgia football fans into the tent of Georgia basketball. But it should be considered a success no matter what. And
Okay.
I will kind of die on that hill, but I would also like to see what the draw looks like in the NCAA tournament. The
Right.
Gonzaga team they played last year was power rated like top 15 nationally. They were, an 8 seed in name only. They were really more like a 4 seed in a lot of ways. If they get somebody that's a little more manageable this year, then maybe it's a different conversation.
And it feels like this team has kind of turned a corner in the last 2 weeks. Some big wins, and lastly, Alabama on Tuesday. They've got one more regular season game. How high right now do you think the ceiling is? Is it one and done in the tournament? Could this team get to the second weekend? Where do you kind of see the ceiling at right now?
The seeding is going to be really interesting because, there was a moment a few weeks ago where Georgia was kind of predicted among the last 4 teams in the field. And so it was like, well, are they going to be a 10 seed, or are they going to be, like if they fall to the 11 line, that might be a good matchup for them in some ways. Now they're kind of close to maybe climbing up and being a 7 seed when this bracket comes up, especially depending on how they do in the SEC tournament. So I think they can certainly win a game, but if you're telling me, Georgia's fallen on the 8-9 line, they're going to have to likely go play a number 1 seed in the second game. Like, I don't know how to expect them to win a game like that, but we'll see. It's NCAA tournament. Strange things happen. I think certainly winning that first round game would be big. If they could climb, and this would probably require a very deep run in Nashville for the SEC tournament, but if they could climb to that 6 seed line, that would put them in a spot where, they could match up with a 3 seed probably in the second round, probably a little bit more manageable
Right.
team that they may have a chance of beating. But those top kind of 5 to 8 teams in college basketball right now are very, very tough. So if you're telling me they got to go beat one of those, I'm not sure I would expect them to do that at the moment.
Okay, gotcha. Well, I want to turn things over to the baseball diamond real quick before we get to spring football that's coming up. Obviously, I know that's kind of where a lot of the focus is regarding Georgia athletics. It's always football, and that's just kind of king around all of college sports. But for baseball right now, interesting week right now as they beat Kennesaw State on Tuesday, which is a solid mid-major program, and then lose at home to Western Carolina on Wednesday. Feels inconsistent at times for the Georgia baseball. Where is kind of like the thermometer on this team right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's inconsistent's a good word for it. Midweek games in college baseball at this time in the year, you are playing different guys and getting a look at some of your reserve players. So I don't know that I'm ready to sound the alarm over the midweek losses. Georgia, didn't lose any of these midweek style games the last couple of years, and then they got into SEC play and they had some struggles, right? So it's not necessarily a 1-for-1 in terms of how they'll project down the road, but I do think pitching in college baseball is always going to be a question. It's been a question for Georgia for a little while. They seem to hit the ball very well. Trey Phelps, Ryan Black, both off to very hot starts. Trey Phelps is on like a 28 game hitting streak right now. Daniel Jackson, who's a catcher, has, I believe, 9 home runs in the first 12 games of the season. So they are doing a lot of things at the plate that we're accustomed to them doing. It's just, can they develop a deep enough pitching rotation and make sure that they're on top of their P's and Q's in the field?
Gotcha. And I'm excited. It sounds like they're getting Kenny Ishikawa back soon, who's missed a little bit of time. Any news on that? It sounds like maybe Wes Johnson's ready to have him back by SEC play.
That's the expectation. Yeah, he had a foul ball off his foot it created a hairline fracture, and they wanted to be careful with him. And so, I would expect to see him back maybe in the next couple of weeks. But he is certainly a two-way weapon who can pitch and hit, and is a guy that can sort of help them get through this tough SEC series that will be coming up for them this spring and summer.
Gotcha. All right, let's get to football here before we let you go on this Thursday afternoon. Nearing spring practice, just to wrap everything up, coming off the Sugar Bowl loss to end the 2025-2026 season, what has the focus been for head coach Kirby Smart this offseason?
You know, I don't know yet, to be honest with you, Hank. It's gonna be interesting to see what he says when we get him here in a couple weeks for the first media availabilities of spring practice. Because in truth, we haven't seen him since the
Right.
loss to Ole Miss in New Orleans last year on the first day of spring. He walked in and he introduced us to the fire, passion, and energy concept, and that became something that now they call it FPE. They were giving out blue helmet caps during fall camp for guys that were bringing the fire, passion, energy. Like that was a ubiquitous theme throughout the entire 2025 season, and I think that was about restoring Georgia's culture. I would say that that culture was probably restored with the way that season went down, just how hard they kind of played, the way that young players grew up, making that SEC championship game, winning it, beating Alabama the way they did. So, what is the next step for a team that was really young in 2025? I'm curious to see like where do they need to get better. They were 54% freshmen and sophomores last year, so they grow up now, and you've got returning guys back like Gunnar Stockton. How do they kind of mature? Is it going to be havoc, on the defensive side of the ball with the hire of Larry Knight? Is it going to be trying to drill the run game, I think, even further and be more consistent in that area? I'm curious where he'll go with it.
Quickly here, I know this is kind of tough because there's so many guys, but want to ask, of the returners on this roster in 2026, is there a guy that you've singled out saying, I'm looking for him to maybe develop and take that next step?
Talon Taylor, the wide receiver. I think he is the buzz around him is very, very high. Just he can do things from a speed standpoint, and he can catch the football. He can get open downfield. I think he's a very complete receiver, and I think he can replace a lot of the touches that Zachariah Branch was getting in the screen game, and they lost a lot of production at that position room. So I think he's ready to step up for him.
And he's kind of a bigger body than Zachariah Branch was, so maybe he'll be able to do some different things and maybe take the top off of defense as well.
Yeah, I think so. We saw him in that Alabama game, the first Alabama game, where he got behind the defense, and unfortunately for him, it was a drop, and then he breaks his collarbone and doesn't play again until the SEC championship game. But at that time, he was growing into a player who I thought was going to be a vertical threat for them in the back half of the 2025 season, and he has the injury. So I expect him to be a guy who can certainly stretch the field for them, yeah.
All right, so he's a name that we need to watch in spring practice for the returners. What about newcomers? A lot of new additions via the transfer portal this offseason. Who is it that you're most excited about right now?
Amaris Williams from Auburn is probably the guy that I've got the closest eye on at the moment. He's got 2 years of college football under his belt, dealt with some injuries at times, and was playing on, frankly, a very, very deep and good Auburn defense the last couple of years. But he's a former 5-star recruit from Clinton, North Carolina, which is my part of the world in Eastern North Carolina, and he's kind of a unique body type for a highly rated edge recruit. He's 6'2", 260, so not these kind of long, lanky 6'5", 240 pass rushers off the edge, but he has burst, and I think having that type of burst that he has to get to the quarterback, that's something Georgia needs. They were lowest sack totals that they've had under Kirby Smart, lowest quarterback pressures, lowest havoc rate that they've had. So they need to up that. But he's also got the size to hang in the run game and be like a 3-down player for Georgia, not just be a guy situationally they bring in on 3rd down to speed rush, but be somebody who 1st and 2nd down will stop the run. So he's got a chance to take a big leap, and I think take some of the weight off of Gabe Harris and Quintavious Johnson's shoulders. There were games last year where Johnson played over 60 defensive snaps, and it's just too much of a load to ask from one player. So they certainly need some depth off the edge.
That's great insight there. And my last question for you is, just because we're nearing the NFL draft and we just had the NFL Combine in Indianapolis, what stuck out to you from the Georgia guys that are going to be in this draft and what they said at the Combine?
Oh, there was actually a lot of positivity around Talon Taylor. Now that you mention it, Dylan Bell and Colby Young both mentioned him as a guy who does some wow things. I think Dylan Bell made a comment where he's like, he's a real five star kind of wide receiver. Like he's got all those tools. I think looking forward, there seems like there's just a lot of confidence in the Georgia process from NFL people talking about Georgia, right? They continue to give all of these quotes and praiseworthy talk of, these are 19-year-old pros essentially in the eyes of NFL general managers. How does Georgia package that and go out in the spring and summer here and kind of build its 2027 recruiting class will be something that we're covering and talking about a lot over the summer.
Graham, well, thanks so much for your time. Looking forward to having you on every week to talk Georgia athletics. And lastly, again, for people that aren't familiar with Dawgs Central, just tell them real quick where they can find you if they enjoyed this conversation and want more.
Yeah, check us out, dawgcentral.com. You can check me out on Twitter at Graham Coffey DC, and would love to see you there. You might see Hank lurking around on the board somewhere if you're lucky on the right day.
Yep, great. Thanks so much, Graham. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Hank.
All right, thanks so much again to Graham for joining the show today. Really insightful from Georgia basketball to baseball, and even a look at who to watch as we get into spring practice for Georgia football nearing here in just a couple of weeks. Again, big thank you to Graham. Looking forward to hearing more from him as the spring continues and we learn more about the athletics at Georgia, with basketball making an NCAA tournament appearance and Georgia football getting underway soon. So stay tuned for plenty more from Graham Coffey, and check out Dawgs Central. I highly recommend that. And with that, we are going to take another quick break here on the WSAV Daily Huddle. It's halftime, but when we return, we're going to be talking about South Carolina athletics, the Braves, and then finally the NBA to wrap up today's show. Third quarter here on the WSAV Daily Huddle. My name is Hank Tatum. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. And hot off the press, we've got to talk about Georgia women's basketball here that played their first game of the SEC women's tournament today. It was the second round overall of the tournament. And Georgia basketball, as I'm recording this, just recently fell in that game to Kentucky 76-61. So it ends the Georgia Bulldogs' regular season, but they're not done yet, as they are pretty much a sure thing to be penciled into the NCAA women's tournament. Of course, we will know more about that later this week, but I feel very strongly. I think that right now they project as a 7 or an 8 seed based on this loss in the SEC tournament. And ultimately, if you go back and look at what this Georgia program had become last year, it was a disaster. And it's been a really great turnaround from Coach Abe there in Athens, and so they will be dancing once again, and we of course will see to find out when that bracket is released where they will be headed, who they will be playing in the first round. If there are a 7 or an 8 seed, I believe that they might get to host. I don't know exactly how that works. Actually, I think they would travel to the 1 seed that hosts, but again, we will keep you updated with Georgia basketball as they will make the tournament. And now we'll talk about South Carolina women's basketball. That of course is a surefire thing, or a sure thing to make the NCAA women's tournament, but they're not done in the SEC either. South Carolina will now take on Kentucky tomorrow at noon in the SEC Women's Tournament. They are the number 1 seed in the SEC, and they go into this game against Kentucky tomorrow coming off the double bye. So obviously, I think they're the favorite here in the SEC, but they're another team to watch that could easily cut down the end of the nets when the NCAA Women's Tournament is all said and done. They will likely be a 1 seed in that tournament, meaning that they will get to host in Columbia for the first 2 rounds of the Women's Tournament, which will be really fun to watch. So that's something to keep an eye on, as the Gamecocks will take on the Wildcats of Kentucky tomorrow in the SEC Women's Tournament. Now back to Athens, Georgia, to take a look at Georgia baseball, who lost a Wednesday midweek game yesterday to Western Carolina. It was kind of an odd week for Georgia, where they had 2 midweek games back-to-back, one with travel, as they went to Kennesaw, Georgia to take on the Kennesaw State Owls and beat them in 8 innings on Tuesday, but they returned to Foley Field in Athens, Georgia, and lost to Western Carolina in what was honestly a thriller yesterday. Hand up, if Georgia fans want to blame me for this loss, I understand it, and I will take accountability, as I was keeping an eye on this game yesterday, and we get to the 8th inning, and Western Carolina was leading 6-4. So they're up by 2 runs in the 8th inning. And I was like, all right, let me see what happens here. I'm very interested to see how this game ends. So I turn it on. The very first pitch I see is a hit by pitch, which allows Trey Phelps to get down to first base, and it loads the bases for the Georgia Bulldogs, trailing by 2 in the 8th. The very next pitch sent out of the park. I believe it was Daniel Jackson. Grand slam. And all of a sudden, Georgia has an 8-6 lead. So I was like, you know what? I might have had something to do if they're able to hang on and win. So we get to the 9th inning. Top 9th, Georgia leading by 2. All they need is 3 outs. And they get the first 2 outs relatively easily. Bases cleared, winning by 2. 1 out to go at Foley Field to wrap up the win on the Wednesday afternoon. But unfortunately for me, I couldn't watch any longer. I had to get back to work. So I turned off the stream. No longer watching this game, thinking, Georgia's got it, no big deal. The last thing I saw was a bloop single. But still, it brought the tying run to the plate, but all you needed was 1 out. How likely is that anyway? Well, then Western Carolina got a double. And then they walked. And all of a sudden, they had the bases loaded with 2 outs. 2 strikes, come to find out. Again, I'm not watching it at this point. Western Carolina hits a grand slam of their own. And then they're up 10-8. And then in the bottom of the 9th, Georgia scratched across 1. Trey Phelps grounded out to end the game. So when I was watching, Georgia all of a sudden hits a grand slam on the second pitch I see. They take a lead. They get 2 outs in the 9th. And then I turned the game off. And the next thing I know, I looked and Western Carolina upset the Bulldogs. So again, hand up. If people want to blame me, I understand it. That's fine. The biggest thing, and we talked about it with Graham, is just inconsistency right now from this Georgia team. You never know what you're going to get, but at the same time, it's midweeks, and it, unfortunately, for college baseball, they're exciting, and they kind of matter, but at the end of the day, if Georgia just handles business when they get to the SEC and wins their series, we won't be talking about the losses now that are 2 straight Wednesdays, actually, on midweek games, losing to Troy last week and Western Carolina this week. Georgia will play Queens in a 4-game series this weekend. They will not have a midweek game next week, and then they begin SEC play as they host the Tennessee Volunteers. As for South Carolina baseball, they get back on track. They win a 4-1 game over Charleston Southern on Wednesday to improve to 9-5, I believe, on the season. They were out-hit in this game by the Buccaneers of Charleston Southern, but they end up getting the 4-1 win for the Gamecocks. It's not a great sign, but a win is a win. And again, a midweek game, you can never complain about stacking the wins. So that's exactly what what South Carolina was able to do. They will play Princeton this weekend in a weekend series. Then they will play the Citadel in a midweek next week, and then they will travel to Florida to open up their SEC play. So definitely we'll keep an eye on all of these programs that we've talked about as their seasons continue. And to wrap up this Southeast segment, let's talk about the Atlanta Braves. Now, the last time we talked about the Atlanta Braves, there was breaking news. It was bad. I got a little upset, I'm going to be honest. The good news is today, or however you want to take it, is that there is no news to report, really, which I think if you're a Braves fan right now, and if you've been a Braves fan since 2021, no news is good news. Jurickson Profar, though, just to update the situation after he got suspended for 162 games. I believe the Major League Baseball Players Association will be appealing the suspension. Newsflash, he won't win it. He is gone. It is over. One of, if not the worst, free agent signings in Atlanta Braves history. Let's just call it what it is. That is the unfortunate reality. They signed him to a 3-year, $42 million deal after his breakout 2024 season. Again, now there's question marks about that 2024 season, I would say, in San Diego in his contract year. He comes to Atlanta in 2025, suspended after the 4th game for half of season. Now heading into 2026, he will miss the entirety of the season, and I don't expect him to be a Brave for very much longer. I don't think he will ever play again for Atlanta, and who knows if he ever plays again in Major League Baseball. But he is gone. He will not be a part of this roster. I feel pretty strongly about for this Braves team. So that is really the last, for now at least, unless something changes, that we will talk about Jurickson Profar. And it does make me wonder. It goes back to Mike Yastrzemski, who the Braves signed to a 2-year, $21 million deal, I believe, back in winter after the winter meetings. And it makes you wonder if maybe the Braves knew about this ahead of time and got ahead of it by signing Yastrzemski, who now it looks like slots in to be an everyday outfielder. What you're likely going to have is Mike Yastrzemski in left every day, Michael Harris in center, and Ronald Acuna in right. I would expect Eli White to potentially get some playing time to replace Yastrzemski. Yastrzemski was hopefully going to be more of a platoon for the Braves, but now he might have to be an everyday player. At DH, there's question marks right now, I think, as to who it is that will start the season there. When Sean Murphy does return, I believe that your typical lineup, barring a move here, will be Sean Murphy and Drake Baldwin splitting the catching duties and the other other one designated hitting whenever they're not behind the plate. But as for the Braves here, still churning through spring training. The World Baseball Classic, though, has started yesterday, and these are the Braves that are participating, and just keep an eye on them as this tournament continues. Basically the World Cup of baseball, if you will. Ronald Acuna is in action for Venezuela. He will play tomorrow night. Ronald Acuna, always fun to watch. He actually, I don't know if you saw the clip, but he got in a little bit of trouble in an exhibition game for the World Baseball Classic as he wanted to challenge a call with the ABS system that will be implemented to Major League Baseball, not realizing maybe that World Baseball Classic didn't have it. So that is one difference between the World Baseball Classic and the regular season for Major League Baseball this year is World Baseball Classic will not be using the ABS. But Ronald Acuna, I think now he understands that, and he will be in action for Venezuela tomorrow night. Ronald Acuna is always must-watch baseball, I would say. And the cool thing is, he will be taking on his Atlanta Braves teammate and Netherlands player in Ozzy Albies. Ozzy Albies, a native of Curacao, who will be playing for the Netherlands, representing Curacao there. So they will get to play against each other in their very first games in the World Baseball Classic here in 2026. So it should be really fun to watch that one. They always have a lot of fun in the Braves dugout, as we've all seen before. It'll be kind of cool to see them get to play against each other. And then the United States will open up their World Baseball Classic on Friday night, taking on Brazil. In previous action so far, we had Australia defeat Chinese Taipei last night in kind of an upset. And then today, South Korea defeated, that was Czechia this morning. And so there's been a little bit of games so far, but it really heats up tomorrow. And with that, that will wrap up today's third quarter. But don't go anywhere. We've got one quarter left, and we're going to talk about the NBA and the Hawks' recent surge. So we'll be right back here on the WSAV Daily Huddle. Fourth quarter here on the WSAV Daily Huddle, and we shift now to the hardwood of the National Basketball Association. Last night, the Hawks beat the Milwaukee Bucks, now winners, I believe, of 5 in a row in Atlanta, and they are above 500, I believe, for the first time since December, now sitting at 32-31 on the season. And there's been some encouraging signs for Atlanta fans as of recent, as since the All-Star break, the Hawks have the best defensive rating across the entirety of the association. That is certainly good news, and I think part of that is because Trae Young isn't on this team. As much as I love Trae Young and what he meant to Atlanta, the defense was obviously lacking, and the Hawks seem to have found their identity now where there's not a gaping hole on defense when he was on the court. A lot of it also has to do with the acquisition of Jonathan Kuminga. That was in a trade that sent Kristaps Porzingis, who was signed just this season, to Golden State. And Kuminga, since coming to Atlanta, has been great. He's really operated well on the wing in transition, and Kristaps Porzingis in Golden State hasn't really played much. He's missed a lot of time, again, due to illness. That was something that had happened a lot in Atlanta, too. So I think the Hawks are big winners of that trade right now. Elsewhere around the league, though, right now, Trae Young will be debuting soon for the Wizards. That will be kind of interesting to watch and see him finally make his Wizards debut. It's the first time in his NBA career that he will not be an Atlanta Hawk. Obviously very sad for the Hawks, but I think that the Wizards are more so looking at next year right now with Trae Young and Anthony Davis paired together in a good young core. But Young will get to play a little bit to end this 2025-2026 season before they set their eyes on the next year. Jason Tatum will be making his debut on Friday, it sounds like, for the Boston Celtics, or his season debut, if you will. And I just think that's really impressive. This guy tore his Achilles just less than 10 months ago, and he will be back on an NBA court this week. So, of course, great to see one of the league's better stars on the court. Obviously good for the league, great for the Celtics, and really cool that Jason Tatum's able to make such a quick return. The one thing you only worry about is, God forbid there's another injury. You hope that, and I would assume that obviously the doctors and physicians know way more than I do, and they've cleared him, of course. But you worry with the Achilles about potential re-injury and not being as strong and trusting it. So we'll see how Jason Tatum plays, but it'll be great to have him back on an NBA court. And before we wrap up today's show, there's just something in the NBA that I've got to address here. I don't intend to be the old man yelling at the cloud right now, but the NBA has a problem, and it's affecting you too, especially if you're an Atlanta Hawks fan. And that problem is tanking. It is running rampant throughout the league. Right now, you have the Pelicans, whose pick is owned by the Hawks, who have no reason to lose, which is a good thing. I'm not about teams wanting to lose. That's not what that's never a good thing for competitiveness in the NBA. So the Pelicans now have won a few games because they're trying to win games because they don't have their own pick. The problem is there are many teams right now in the league. Yes, I'm looking at you, Sacramento Kings, Utah Jazz, Washington Wizards, Indiana Pacers, Brooklyn Nets, Chicago Bulls. Looking at all of you right now. They're wanting to lose. They're trying to lose, and the league is allowing it. Now, you can say, well, their rosters aren't as good. What do you mean they're trying to lose? We saw the Utah Jazz before the All-Star break actively sitting players in the fourth quarter due to injuries. And guys that we didn't know were injured getting shut down for surgeries that they were going to have that normally would just be a pretty typical offseason procedure. They're sitting guys in the fourth quarter in competitive games because deep down, they don't want to win. They want a better pick in this upcoming NBA draft. They want to be seeded better in the lottery because this is a great draft upcoming. And it's hurting the Hawks because obviously the Pelicans are winning and these teams are continually losing. So now we're before the All-Star break. The Hawks had a top 3 chance to get the number 1 overall pick, and they were going to be right in there. The Hawks-Pelicans pick is 6th best odds in the league. Now, it's not just 6th best odds, as the Hawks also have the Bucks pick, and those two are merged together. The Atlanta Hawks will receive the best of either the Pelicans or the Bucks picks, whoever winds up being higher in the draft. The Bucks right now have the 10th best odds at the number 1 overall pick. So once those lottery balls fall and we figure out where teams will be, whoever's higher, the Pelicans or the Bucks, the Hawks will grab that pick. This draft is very, very deep, and it looks to be right now as one of the best that we've ever seen, probably since 2003, when obviously LeBron James and Dwayne Wade and Carmelo Anthony all came out of school or high school to the NBA draft. This one could be that good, led by Kansas guard Darren Peterson. A lot of question marks around him and his availability and his playing time right now. You've got BYU forward AJ DeBansa, Duke forward Cam Boozer, son of Carlos Boozer, obviously. You've got UNC forward Caleb Wilson. There's a lot of guys. Arizona forward Koa Pete. There are so many guys in this draft that are going to be really, really good. Keaton Wallace is another name to watch. A-Cuff from the Arkansas Razorbacks. So many guys. The idea, though, of the Hawks getting Darren Peterson or AJ DeBansa, which seemed realistic early on in this season, that is probably over. It's going to be tough. Like, the Hawks are going to have to improve their odds, likely, in the NBA lottery than it is that they're going to be seated in one of those top 3 spots. So you'd have to have a jump. But, again, having the 6th, the 8th pick, the 9th pick, whatever it may be, I don't think it'll be as low as 9, probably somewhere in that 5 to 8 range. It's still going to produce a really good player, we think, for the NBA draft and for the Hawks for next season, who are kind of gearing up where they've freed up a lot of roster space, a lot of cap space, could potentially make a big free agency signing or a trade, and they will have a top pick in this year's NBA draft. With that, that's going to end our episode today. Thanks so much for joining us. Hope you enjoyed hearing from Graham Coffey. We'll see plenty more of him here on the WSAV Daily Huddle. I'm Hank Tatum. No show tomorrow on Friday, March 6th, but we will be back on Monday to discuss high school basketball and anything else that's happened in the sports world, all the way from the Coastal Empire and Low Country to the biggest news and notes on the national scene. Thanks again for joining us today. We'll see you next time here on the WSAV Daily Huddle.